Imagine a world where a single empire ruled over 60 million people, stretched across 3 continents, controlled the Mediterranean like it was a private lake, and built roads so strong that some of them still exist today. An empire so powerful that its fall would send shockwaves through centuries, shaping the nations, religions, and borders we know today. That empire was Rome. But Rome wasn't built in a day. And it didn't fall in one either. Its rise was a story of ambition, war, innovation, betrayal, and destiny. In the next 15 minutes, we'll travel back over 2,000 years to witness how a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River grew into the mightiest empire the ancient world had ever seen, and how, eventually, it collapsed under the weight of its own greatness. We'll explore legendary leaders, bloody wars, monumental achievements, and the slow, silent cracks that brought a giant to its knees. This is the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Every empire has a beginning, and Rome's story begins not in marble palaces or mighty armies, but with a legend of twins, of betrayal, of survival, and of destiny. The year was roughly 753 BCE on the banks of the Tiber River, in the region we now call Central Italy. A tiny Latin settlement existed among hills and forests. According to Roman mythology, this land would give birth to 2 brothers, Romulus and Remus. The story goes like this. Their mother, Rhea Silvia, was a Vestal virgin, forbidden to bear children. But the god Mars, the god of war, fathered twins with her, terrified of a prophecy that these twins might one day overthrow the throne. Their uncle, King Julius Caesar, ordered the babies to be drowned in the Tiber River. But fate had other plans. The river did not swallow them. Instead, they floated gently to the riverbank, where a she-wolf, a symbol of wild strength and protection, found them. She nursed them as her own, until a shepherd and his wife raised them to adulthood. Years later, when they learned their true identity, Romulus and Remus killed Julius and restored their grandfather to the throne. But the brothers had bigger dreams. They set out to build a new city, a city that would one day rule the known world. But legend turns bloody. A dispute over where to build their new city grew fierce. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill. Remus favored the Aventine Hill. Tempers flared. Blood was spilled. Romulus killed Remus, and, standing over his brother's body, declared himself the first king of a new city. He named it Romana, Rome. In myth, Rome was born through blood and ambition. In reality, Rome grew out of a cluster of Latin tribes, strategically positioned between the powerful Etruscans to the north and the Greek colonies to the south. Its location on a series of 7 hills near a fordable point of the Tiber River made it an ideal place for trade, defense, and expansion. The early Romans were farmers, herders, and traders. But above all, they were survivors. This small settlement developed into a monarchy, known as the Roman Kingdom. Between roughly 753 and 509 BCE, Rome was ruled by a line of 7 legendary kings, and each king added a stone to the foundation of what would become an empire. Romulus didn't just name the city, he shaped its soul. He organized the first Senate, a council of 100 elders, laying the groundwork for Rome's future political systems. He also established the Roman legions, a disciplined fighting force that would one day conquer the world. He welcomed outcasts, refugees, and exiles into Rome, making it a place where strength came not from bloodlines, but from belonging. To secure wives for his male followers, Romulus arranged the infamous rape of the Sabine women, a brutal abduction that eventually led to a union between Romans and Sabines. It was a dark act, but one that forged a multicultural identity in the city's earliest days. After Romulus vanished, some say taken to the heavens, others say killed, Rome's second king, Numa Pompilius, brought peace. He was a Sabine by origin. Under Numa, Rome focused on religion, law, and structure. He established many of the religious institutions and priesthoods that would define Roman culture, like the Vestal Virgins, the Pontifex Maximus, and the temple rituals. Numa gave the Romans a sense of order, a sacred code. Next came Tullus Hostilius, the embodiment of warlike ambition. He expanded Roman territory through relentless military campaigns, notably against Alba Longa, Rome's mother city. He was remembered for turning a small city into a fighting power. Under Tullus, Rome became feared. Ancus Marcius followed, blending war and diplomacy. He built Rome's first bridge across the Tiber, the Pons Sublicius. He extended Roman territory to the sea, founding the port of Ostia, securing salt and trade routes. Ancus laid the groundwork for Rome's commercial power. Then came Tarquinius Priscus, the first Etruscan king. He brought Etruscan culture, engineering, and architecture to Rome. Under him, the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewer systems, was built, draining the swamps and turning Rome into a livable, expanding city. He also began the construction of the Forum Romanum, the beating heart of Roman public life. Servius Tullius rose from humble beginnings to become king. He reorganized the Roman population into classes based on wealth and property, creating a system that blended military and political power. He built the Servian Wall, protecting the growing city. For the first time, Rome began to look like a true city-state. And then came Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. His rule was marked by oppression, arrogance, and fear. He silenced the Senate, ruled like a despot, and used forced labor to complete massive building projects, like the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. But tyranny never lasts forever. One event would bring an end to the Roman monarchy. Tarquinius' son, Sextus Tarquinius, raped Lucretia, a noble woman of impeccable virtue. Lucretia, unable to live with the dishonor, took her own life, but not before calling on the Roman people to avenge her. Her death ignited outrage. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the Romans rose against the king. In 509 BCE, Tarquinius Superbus was overthrown, the monarchy ended, and from its ashes, a new political system emerged, the Roman Republic. This moment was more than just a change in leadership. It was the birth of an idea, that no single man should ever hold absolute power over Rome again. This idea would shape Roman politics for centuries, even as ambitious men tried to break it. By the end of the kingdom period, Rome was no longer a small cluster of huts. It had temples, forums, walls, bridges, and a structured society. Its armies were disciplined, its religion structured, and its citizens fiercely proud. Rome's success wasn't just luck. It came from three key strengths: strategic location, controlling trade between North and South Italy; adaptability, absorbing and improving on the cultures of Etruscans and Greeks; military discipline, forged in endless border conflicts. But perhaps Rome's greatest strength was its ambition. Even as they overthrew their king, the Romans believed their city was destined for greatness, and that belief would carry them through centuries of war, conquest, and glory. In 509 BCE, the last king was gone. The people of Rome established a new system, a republic, where power would be shared, laws would be written, and the citizens would have a voice. But this was no modern democracy. Power remained in the hands of Rome's elites, the patricians. Yet, it was a revolutionary step for its time. The Romans vowed never to have a king again. Instead, they created two consuls, elected yearly, to share power. They built a senate that guided policy and the system of checks and balances to prevent tyranny. Rome was entering a new age, one that would make it the greatest republic the world had ever known. But before Rome could dominate the world, it first had to survive. Neighboring tribes watched Rome closely, rivals circled, and in the centuries ahead, wars would forge an empire, from the blood of brothers, from the courage of rebels. From the vision of builders and lawgivers, Rome was born, a city destined not to remain a city, but to become an idea. an idea that would change the world. The monarchy was gone, but Rome was just getting started. In 509 BCE, the Romans created a new political system that would set them apart from their neighbors. They called it the Republic. To them, it was not just a government, it was a statement. Rome would never again bow to a single king. Power would be shared, balanced, and checked, at least in theory. The consuls were elected each year, each with equal power, ensuring that no one man could dominate the state. Beneath them stood the Senate, a powerful body composed mostly of patricians, Rome's aristocratic class. The Senate advised, influenced, and often controlled decisions behind the scenes. And beneath the Senate, there were assemblies, where citizens could vote and serve in the army. It was not a democracy, we know it, but compared to many of its neighbors, Rome had created a system that allowed for remarkable flexibility, ambition, and expansion. The Republic was built on competition. Roman society revolved around honor, military glory, and political advancement. Ambitious men rose through the cursus honorum, a sequence of political offices that culminated in the consulship. This hunger for prestige did not weaken Rome, it fueled it. Every senator wanted to outdo the others with victories on the battlefield, triumphal parades, and monumental building projects. War became not just a matter of survival, but a pathway to personal power and national greatness. In its early years, the Roman Republic was surrounded by enemies. The Latin tribes to the south, the Sabines, the Etruscans to the north, and the Samnites in the Apennine Mountains all tested the young republic's strength. But Rome proved relentless. Unlike many other ancient cities, Rome had a remarkable ability to recover from defeats, learn from mistakes, and adapt strategies. This was their secret weapon, not just military power, but resilience. When Rome lost a war, it came back stronger. When its walls were burned, it rebuilt them higher. When armies fell, new ones rose. One of Rome's earliest challenges came from the Etruscans, the same people who had once ruled over it during the kingdom. The Etruscan city of Veii, located just 20 kilometers north of Rome, became its first great rival. After years of bloody warfare, the Romans finally captured Veii in 396 BCE under the leadership of Marcus Furius Camillus. This victory marked a turning point. Rome had stepped beyond its borders and shown the Italian peninsula that it was no longer just a city, it was becoming a power. But Rome's growing strength also attracted danger. In 390 BCE, a terrifying force swept down from the north, the Gauls. These Celtic warriors crushed the Roman army at the Battle of the Tiber River. They entered Rome, sacked the city, burned buildings, and demanded a ransom of gold. The Romans paid to save what was left. For many civilizations, this would have been the end. But for Rome, it was the beginning of a new chapter. The sack of Rome seared itself into Roman memory like a scar. From that day forward, Romans vowed never to let such a humiliation happen again. They rebuilt their walls, expanded their armies, and became obsessed with security and expansion. Rome's next great challenge came in central Italy, the Samnites. These fierce mountain people engaged Rome in 3 brutal wars between 343 and 90 BCE. The Samnite Wars tested every aspect of Roman resilience. The Samnites won stunning victories, including the famous disaster at the Caudine Forks, where an entire Roman army was forced to surrender and march under a humiliating yoke. But again, Rome learned. It adapted its legions to the rough terrain, reorganized its strategy, and slowly ground down the Samnites. By the end of the Third Samnite War, Rome controlled most of central and southern Italy. Its influence stretched far beyond the Tiber. It was now the dominant power in the Italian peninsula. Rome's success was not built on brute force alone. It was also built on smart diplomacy. Unlike many conquerors, the Romans did not simply destroy their enemies, they absorbed them. When Rome conquered a city, it often offered partial citizenship, military alliances, or local autonomy in exchange for loyalty. This system created a web of allies across Italy. These allies supplied troops, paid tribute, and strengthened Rome's armies. In time of war, Rome could call upon tens of thousands of allied soldiers, giving it a manpower advantage unmatched by any rival. As Rome grew, so did its ambitions. The Italian peninsula was not enough. Across the sea lay Carthage, a wealthy and powerful maritime empire located in North Africa. In present-day Tunisia, Carthage controlled much of the western Mediterranean through trade and naval dominance. It was rich, organized, and strong. Rome and Carthage were destined to collide. Their rivalry would shape the ancient world. The First Punic War began in 64 BCE over control of Sicily. Rome was a land power, Carthage a naval power. At first, the Romans had no real fleet, but true to their character, they adapted quickly. They built ships modeled after captured Carthaginian vessels and introduced the corvus, a boarding device that allowed Roman soldiers to turn naval battles into land battles at sea. This innovation turned the tide. After more than 20 years of brutal warfare, Carthage was forced to surrender. Rome gained control of Sicily, its first province outside the Italian mainland. The Republic had become a Mediterranean power, but Carthage was not finished. A young Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca would become Rome's greatest nightmare. Into 18 BCE, during the Second Punic War, Hannibal led an army including war elephants across the Alps to strike at the heart of Italy. He crushed the Romans at the Battle of Trebia, then Lake Trasimene, and finally at Cannae, one of the most devastating defeats in Roman history. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers died. Many of Rome's allies began to waver. For a moment, it looked as if the Republic might fall. But Rome did what Rome always did: it endured. The Senate refused to negotiate. Consul after consul raised new armies. They avoided direct confrontation with Hannibal, wearing him down through attrition and targeting Carthaginian holdings elsewhere. Eventually, under the brilliant leadership of Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, the Romans invaded North Africa. At the Battle of Zama in 200 BCE, Scipio defeated Hannibal. Carthage was forced to surrender again, losing its empire, navy, and wealth. Rome emerged as the dominant power in the western Mediterranean. Rome's expansion did not stop there. In the east, the Hellenistic kingdoms that had emerged from the breakup of Alexander the Great's empire became targets for Roman ambition. Between the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, Rome fought a series of wars in Macedonia, Greece, and Asia Minor. One by one, great powers like Macedon and the Seleucid Empire fell before Roman legions. By the mid-1st century BCE, Rome controlled most of the Mediterranean world. They called it Mare Nostrum, our sea, but with great power came great challenges. The Republic, designed for a city-state, struggled to govern a vast empire. Wealth poured into Rome from conquered lands. Enormous estates, or latifundia, were owned by the wealthy elite, worked by slaves captured in war. Small farmers, the backbone of the early republic, were pushed off their land. Inequality grew, and with it, tension between the rich and the poor. Political corruption became rampant. Senators competed for control over provinces and armies, enriching themselves. This growing inequality led to social unrest. In the 2nd century BCE, the Gracchus brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, tried to reform the system by redistributing land to the poor. Both were killed in violent political struggles, setting a dangerous precedent for bloodshed in Roman politics. Meanwhile, the army itself was changing. The Marian reforms, introduced by Gaius Marius in 107 BCE, allowed the landless poor to join the legions. Soldiers now fought not for the state, but for their generals, who promised them land and wealth. Ambitious men began to use the loyalty of their armies to challenge the state itself. The Republic became a battlefield of political factions. On one side were the optimates, the conservative senatorial elite who sought to maintain the old order. On the other were the populares, leaders who claimed to champion the common people. Violence erupted in the streets of Rome, political assassinations became common, and looming over it all were the generals, men like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar, who commanded armies larger and more loyal than the Republic could control. In 88 BCE, Lucius Cornelius Sulla marched his army on Rome itself, an unthinkable act that shattered the Republic's political norms. He seized power, became dictator, and unleashed bloody purges against his enemies. Although he eventually retired, he had shown the world that whoever controlled the legions could control Rome. A dangerous precedent was set. Over the next decades, power struggles intensified. Julius Caesar, a charismatic and ambitious general, rose to prominence after his brilliant campaigns in Gaul. He conquered vast territories, brought unimaginable wealth to Rome, and gained the undying loyalty of his legions. The Senate grew fearful of his power and ordered him to disband his army. Instead, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, declaring war on the Senate itself. Civil war erupted between Caesar and Pompey. Caesar triumphed, entered Rome as a victor, and became dictator for life. This marked the beginning of the end of the Roman Republic. The very system designed to prevent one man from holding ultimate power had been broken. Caesar initiated reforms, centralized authority, and weakened the Senate's influence, but not everyone welcomed his rule. In 44 BCE, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius assassinated him on the Ides of March, hoping to restore the Republic. But instead of saving it, they plunged Rome into further chaos. The Republic had grown too big, too divided, and too dependent on strongmen to return to what it once was. Caesar's death sparked another series of civil wars, paving the way for the rise of his heir, Octavian. But that is a story for the next chapter, the story of how the Republic transformed into an empire. The death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE did not save the Roman Republic, it shattered it. The senators who struck him down believed they were rescuing Rome from a tyrant, but what they unleashed was something far worse. The Republic was too divided, too fragile, and too dependent on the power of generals to return to its old ways. In the bloody vacuum that followed, two forces emerged to seize control: Caesar's supporters, led by Mark Antony, and Octavian, and the defenders of the senatorial order, led by Brutus and Cassius. Civil war erupted almost immediately. At the Battle of Philippi in 40 BCE, Antony and Octavian crushed the forces of the assassins. Brutus and Cassius took their own lives. The dream of restoring the Republic died with them. With the Senate powerless, the victors turned on each other. Mark Antony, the experienced general and loyal ally of Caesar, controlled the eastern provinces. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and political heir, controlled the west. At first, they formed a fragile alliance, but it could not last. Antony allied himself with Cleopatra, the powerful queen of Egypt, and together they posed a direct challenge to Octavian's authority. In Rome, Octavian portrayed Antony as a traitor who had fallen under the spell of a foreign queen. Tensions escalated until war was inevitable. In 31 BCE, their forces met at the Battle of Actium, a decisive naval clash off the western coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet, commanded by Agrippa, outmaneuvered and crushed Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled to Egypt, where they took their own lives. With their deaths, Octavian became the undisputed master of Rome. Octavian understood something that Caesar had not. He knew that Romans despised kings, and the memory of the Republic still lingered. So instead of declaring himself king, he cloaked his power in the language of tradition. In 27 BCE, the Senate granted him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. Officially, the Republic still existed, with its Senate, magistrates, and laws. In reality, all power now flowed through one man. Augustus held supreme command of the military, controlled the treasury, and decided foreign policy. He became the first emperor of Rome, though he never used the title openly. The Roman Empire was born not with a revolution, but with a quiet transformation. Under Augustus, Rome entered a golden age. After decades of civil war, the empire enjoyed relative peace and stability. Augustus reformed the administration, creating a professional bureaucracy to govern the vast territories under Roman control. He reorganized the army, ensuring its loyalty to the state rather than to ambitious generals. He launched massive building projects, declaring that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Temples, forums, theaters, and roads were built across the empire. Trade flourished, art and literature thrived. Writers like Virgil, Horace, and Ovid celebrated Rome's greatness and Augustus's rule. The emperor portrayed himself not as a tyrant, but as the father of the nation, a bringer of peace. This period became known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. But Rome's peace was built on power. The legions secured its borders, crushed rebellions, and expanded its reach. Augustus's successors inherited an empire that stretched from Spain to Syria, from Britain to Egypt. The imperial system allowed for efficiency and order, but it also concentrated immense power in the hands of a single ruler. Some emperors used that power wisely, others did not. After Augustus came Tiberius, a capable but cold ruler who maintained stability but inspired little love. Then Caligula, whose short reign became infamous for cruelty and excess. Then Claudius, who expanded the empire into Britain. And Nero, whose name became synonymous with tyranny and chaos. Under Nero, parts of Rome burned, Christians were persecuted, and the imperial image was stained. Despite these crises, the empire endured because its system was strong. The provinces were governed through a mix of Roman officials and local elites who benefited from Roman rule. Roads and sea routes connected distant lands, allowing trade and communication to flow like never before. The empire became a vast, interconnected world where Roman law, courtesy, and culture spread to millions of people. For in many subjects, Rome meant order, roads, security, and opportunity. For others, it meant subjugation and taxation, but the empire held together. After Nero's death in 68 CE, Rome faced another civil war, known as the Year of the Four Emperors. But from that chaos emerged Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty, who restored order and stability. His successors expanded and strengthened the empire further. By the 2nd century CE, under emperors like Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, Rome reached the height of its power. Trajan expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent, conquering Dacia and pushing deep into the east. Hadrian consolidated and defended the borders, famously building Hadrian's Wall in Britain. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, ruled during an age of prosperity, but also faced growing challenges on the frontiers. The Pax Romana lasted for roughly 2 centuries, an extraordinary achievement for the ancient world. Cities flourished, Roman culture spread, and millions lived under a single political order. But beneath the marble and order, cracks were already forming. The imperial system depended heavily on the competence of the emperor. When good rulers like Augustus, Trajan, or Marcus Aurelius sat on the throne, the empire thrived. When weak, corrupt, or unstable rulers like Caligula or Nero took power, it faltered. Succession was always uncertain, and the army often decided who ruled next. Emperors lived and died by the loyalty of their legions. Moreover, Rome's wealth and power created new problems. The gap between rich and poor widened. Slavery was widespread, and the economy relied heavily on conquest. When expansion slowed, so did the flow of wealth. Social tensions simmered beneath the surface. The borders of the empire were vast and increasingly difficult to defend. Germanic tribes, Parthians, and other rivals constantly tested Roman strength. For now, the empire stood proud and powerful, ruling over more than 60 million people. But no empire is eternal. The forces that had lifted Rome to greatness was slowly beginning to turn against it. And in time, the cracks would widen. The Roman Empire reached its peak under the rule of emperors like Trajan and Hadrian, but no power can rise forever without facing decline. The seeds of Rome's fall were already sown during its greatest age. By the late 2nd century CE, the empire was stretched thin, its borders immense and difficult to defend. Endless wars along the frontiers drained resources, and the loyalty of the legions began to shift from the state to their commanders. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius spent much of his reign fighting along the Danube against invading tribes, and when he died in 180 CE, he was succeeded by his son Commodus, whose reckless rule marked a turning point. Unlike his predecessors, Commodus was more interested in personal glory than governance. His erratic behavior and corruption weakened imperial authority and discredited the throne. After Commodus's death, Rome descended into political instability. The throne became a prize for whoever could command the strongest army. In the 3rd century CE, the empire experienced what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Civil wars, economic collapse, and foreign invasions shook the empire to its core. In less than 50 years, dozens of emperors rose and fell, many dying violently. Inflation soared, cities declined, and plague ravaged the population. Germanic tribes pushed into Roman territory, while in the east, the Sassanid Persians inflicted heavy defeats. For the first time in centuries, the survival of the empire itself seemed uncertain. Yet Rome did not fall immediately. Strong rulers like Aurelian and Diocletian temporarily restored order. Diocletian recognized that the empire was too vast for one man to rule, so he divided it into the Eastern and Western empires, hoping to stabilize governance. He also implemented harsh reforms, increasing control over the economy and society. But these measures only delayed the inevitable. The Western Empire, poorer and more vulnerable, grew weaker. Rome itself was no longer the true capital. Power shifted east to cities like Milan, and later Constantinople. By the 4th century, Christianity had risen from a persecuted faith to the official religion of the empire under Constantine. This transformation changed Roman identity, uniting some but dividing others. The old pagan traditions faded, and with them, part of the cultural glue that had bound the empire together. Meanwhile, new pressures mounted. Germanic tribes, pushed westward by the Huns, crossed into Roman lands. The empire could no longer absorb or repel them as it once had. Corruption grew. Armies were often composed of foreign mercenaries with little loyalty to Rome. By the late 400s, the Western Empire was exhausted. In 476 CE, the last emperor, Romulus Augustus, was deposed by the Germanic leader Odoacer. The Western Roman Empire had fallen. What remained of Rome's power shifted permanently to the east, to Byzantium. The Eternal City was no longer the heart of an empire. It was the ghost of its former glory. By the time the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 CE, the world had already changed. Rome, once the unrivaled center of power, had fractured into a patchwork of successor kingdoms ruled by Germanic tribes. But the fall of the Western Empire was not a sudden event, it was the final step on a long process of transformation. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to flourish for nearly 1,000 years after the West fell. Its capital, Constantinople, became the new heart of Roman administration, wealth, and culture. While the city of Rome crumbled, Constantinople rose as a beacon of stability, preserving Roman law, art, and knowledge. Greek became the dominant language of the East, but its leaders still called themselves Romans, and the empire still saw itself as the true continuation of Roman greatness. In the West, however, the legacy of Rome did not disappear. Roman law influenced the new kingdoms that emerged from its ruins. The Catholic Church, centered in Rome, carried forward many aspects of Roman administration and authority, becoming the most powerful institution in medieval Europe. Roman roads continued to shape trade routes. Roman cities remained important centers, and the Latin language evolved into the Romance languages, spoken by millions today. Even in ruins, Rome's shadow was vast. The fall of the Western Empire also marked the beginning of the Middle Ages in Europe, a period of fragmentation, migration, and transformation. But it was not simply an age of darkness. It was an age in which Roman ideals were reshaped into new forms. The legacy of Roman engineering, governance, military organization, and culture endured in countless ways. Kings claimed Roman authority. Empires modeled themselves after its example, and later generations would look back on Rome just as a fallen power, but as the foundation of Western civilization. The Roman Empire's decline was the product of many forces: economic strain, political instability, military overextension, and external invasions. But it was also a story of adaptation. Even in death, Rome did not vanish. It transformed, leaving a legacy that stretched across continents and centuries. The empire fell, but its idea lived on. For more than a millennium, Rome had risen from a cluster of huts by the Tiber River to the greatest empire the ancient world had ever known. It had faced enemies, civil wars, and countless challenges. It had built roads that connected continents, armies that conquered nations, and ideas that outlasted its rulers. Its history is not just a story of power and conquest, but of resilience, ambition, and transformation. The fall of Rome was not a single night when the lights went out. It was a gradual fading of an empire that had shaped the destiny of millions. Even today, echoes of Rome are everywhere, in our languages, in our laws, in the architecture of our cities, in the political systems we use, and even in the way we think about power and civilization. Rome became more than a place. It became a memory, a symbol, a legend. Empires have risen and fallen since, but none have left a shadow as long as Rome's. It reminds us that no power is eternal, and that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to change. But it also reminds us that ideas can outlive walls, armies, and kings. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire is not just ancient history. It is a mirror, a story of human ambition, triumph, and fragility. A warning of what power can build and what it can destroy. And perhaps, most importantly, a reminder that while empires fall, their legacies shape the world long after their banners are gone.